What is up, people? Today I'm ranking every Game & Watch handheld, starting from the humble beginnings of Ball in 1980 to the most recent The Legend of Zelda in 2021. Since I have now played and beaten them all, if possible, I figured I would offer my knowledge to the unwashed masses. Now, some of these handhelds have multiple versions, but I'm only including multiple versions as different spots if there are gameplay differences, rather than just differences in the presentation. So yes, Egg and Mickey Mouse will share a spot. Now, Game & Watch is actually pretty underrated when it comes to its overall influence on video games as a medium, which I'll go into later in this video. But first, in dead last, we have Pinball. Now, I don't care about Pinball, but I seem to be alone on that. Pinball has no doubt had enduring popularity for almost 100 years. You go to an arcade, nobody is playing, I don't know, video games? Everyone just cares about pinball. So it's not too surprising they would try and port it to the Game & Watch. And you can't say they didn't try, but was it ever going to work? Of course not, alright? You cannot execute physics on a mere Game & Watch. On caveman technology, it's just not going to work. As far as pinball video games, this is pretty much the worst one I've ever played due to having zero physics. Who knows, maybe it's better than the Tiger Electronics attempts at pinball. Of the ones I've played though, Sonic Spinball still remains the best. Next is Donkey Kong 3, which plays nothing like Donkey Kong 3. This is a part of the Micro Versus series, which means it's 2-player, but good luck finding another person willing to play this with you. So yeah, I've only played Game Mode A, which is versus a computer opponent, and this game is pretty much impossible to lose. In Game & Watch Gallery 4, it's one of the absolute easiest 5 stars you can go for. Basically, you just try and protect your plants from these spear-wielding flies by spraying them, setting them towards your opponent. You can play this forever without losing because Donkey Kong is just far too incompetent. Fun fact though, this is actually the first playable appearance of the ape, so that's pretty cool. At 51 is Blackjack. Now I couldn't tell you how many times I've had to recreate this game in various programming languages in a bunch of different classes for whatever reason. And it seems Nintendo was forced to recreate it as a Game & Watch. Game Mode A is basically what you'd expect from Blackjack, while Game Mode B is basically slots. So yeah, back when Nintendo liked to promote gambling. But I can't personally see the appeal because it turns out, this device is incapable of printing money. What is even the point, alright? It's just a number that goes up and down and means nothing. Who cares? Here we have Boxing or Punch-Out, depending on the region. And if this counts as a Punch-Out game, that's kind of sad. Punch-Out games, of course, generally being known for its memorable characters, impeccable design, and coming up with a strategy to best your opponents while doing your best to react to everything they throw at you. Meanwhile, this Game & Watch game has none of those things. Just like Donkey Kong 3 before it, the computer opponent is a complete joke and impossible to lose to. Perhaps this game is more interesting with the second person, but when they reimagined this game in Game & Watch Gallery 4 featuring a Waluigi vs Luigi showdown, it still had all the same problems. Again, to lose in this, it has to be on purpose. Manhole Gold version. You play as a guy tasked with being a bridge for a bunch of passerby who seem to have a death wish. I mean, can you really trust this guy? The reason this is so low is because it starts out real slow. It really takes a while to get going. If you miss, it also doesn't reset everything on screen, which can mess you up. And indeed, right after that we have Manhole New Widescreen version, which gets going a bit sooner in comparison. There's 2 guys on screen before you even hit 10 points compared to the gold version, which takes until the double digits. Also in this version they reset everything on screen if you miss, so it's not a substantial improvement, but it deserves to be at least 1 spot higher. Nintendo on the other hand seems to think Manhole is the best Game & Watch game or something, because it's the only one they made playable for the e-reader, after advertising that Game & Watch would be on e-reader. But for me, yeah, it's a bit lower on my favorites. Donkey Kong Hockey. Crazy enough, this is not the only time Donkey Kong would end up playing hockey. Actually, he's done it in many games. But it is interesting that there's an entire game dedicated to it. This is the last and best of the Micro Versus series since the computer opponent actually has a chance of beating you. Honestly, this game doesn't play too great. If I score on this game, it just feels like I got lucky and not because I hit the puck in a particular way. This game must have flopped or something and greatly offended Nintendo because this would be the last Donkey Kong game for 10 years until Donkey Kong Country and Donkey Kong 94 would drop in the year 1994, resurrecting the poor forgotten fellow. Next up is Balloon Fight. Now we all know Balloon Fight for NES, absolute classic. Balloon Fight on Game & Watch, not so much. Frankly, it was never going to work on Game & Watch, and it seems they only attempted to replicate Mode C from the original game. Basically, this whole thing is a thoroughly boring auto-scroller where you try and dodge sparks. It's sadly missing the fantastic floating physics programmed by Satoru Iwata himself. But this game does have a boss fight with Oiram Repis. And this fight is actually pretty challenging. As it turns out, Oiram Repis is actually Super Mario backwards! What? Safebuster. In this game, you play as a security guard and you have to protect a safe from being busted by a maniac dropping bombs. You can catch these bombs in a tube, but you can only hold 3 at a time. You can choose to drop these bombs either to your left or right. If you choose to drop them to your left, you can try and juggle a torch. And if you get it high enough, it'll blow the robber's box of bombs up. You can get extra points this way. This is actually really hard to pull off, especially on Game Mode B where there's a cover that often closes, which makes it pretty hard to juggle. This is not the most interesting use of the double screen, and not the most exciting of games either in my opinion. I actually find this one kind of annoying since there's nothing more devastating than having 3 bombs in the cover closing on you, or being unable to move when a bomb is right next to you, making you think you can catch it, but you can't. Most Game & Watch games would give you until the last second, but not this one. It just wants you to suffer. Donkey Kong Circus, aka Mickey Mouse Panorama. That's right, these are actually the same game. I initially had them separate since I do prefer Donkey Kong Circus, since Mickey can't do anything but hijack other people's games. But I have to be sensible here. Wait, the Mickey one came out first? What the heck? But yeah, big gorilla juggling pineapples on a barrel definitely more appealing to me than some Mickey Mouse Circus nonsense. Notably, this is actually the first playable appearance of Donkey Kong. I accidentally lied earlier when I said it was Donkey Kong 3. And this is also the game MatPat used to try and convince people that Mario is evil. But in reality, if you read the manual, Mario is just another member of the audience that happens to be laughing at DK, which means he's actually normal, not mental. There are a lot of juggle games on the Game & Watch, but for me this is the weakest one when it comes to the gameplay. Egg, aka Mickey Mouse. Yes, another entry where you think Mickey hijacked another game. But like the previous, the Mickey version came out first, so I don't know. There's no way that Egg wasn't designed first, since who the heck associates Mickey with catching eggs in any capacity? I mean, this was actually the first Disney video game ever created. Not too surprising since Nintendo and Disney's relationship goes back to 1959. But it really feels like they just stuck Mickey into Egg and released it 5 days earlier, simply because Mickey is slightly more popular than this random wolf. They also replaced the chicken that looks out the window with Minnie Mouse. If you miss while this chicken or Minnie is looking out the window, the player only gets half a miss, which is pretty unique, as the egg hatches into a baby chicken. This happening with Minnie is just strange. Of course, a wolf wanting these eggs makes a whole lot more sense, the dude looks hungry. The Game & Watch Gallery 3 reimagining of this game is definitely a lot better in my opinion, being more fast-paced, and they threw bob-ombs into the mix. The original, not nearly as exciting. Turtle Bridge. This might actually be the most rage-inducing of the Game & Watch games, because these turtles don't actually like to cooperate when it comes to forming a bridge. They're more concerned with eating whatever fish comes by. It might actually be the hardest Game & Watch game to reach triple digits, since the only way you can score is by taking the tourist baggage from one side of the lake to the other. So it's a pretty slow scoring game overall. This game is mostly all about patience rather than being quick, which is why I think it's a bit lower on the list for me, since I don't find it as engaging as the faster paced games. So just like the previous game, I prefer the Game & Watch Gallery 3 reimagining due to the increased speed. Crab grab. But do you really grab crabs in this game? No. You merely push them, so I don't know why it's called that. You'll see this game is pretty unique looking compared to most, since it was one of the only 2 games released in the Super Color series. It also plays unique as well. You can only get points once you've cleared the screen of all the crabs at the top, and how many points you get is determined by how much time is left on the timer. This might be one of the only games where Game A is harder than Game B. In Game B, the crabs come from the bottom at a steady rate, whereas in Game A, crabs appear below you for every crab you push, which makes it really easy to trap yourself. Definitely not a very good feeling when that happens, since you're basically unable to play the game and have to kill yourself. Ball, the game by Gunpei Yokoi in 1980 that started it all, Nintendo's first handheld video game, which is why it's extremely basic in its presentation and concept. There'd end up being many Game & Watch juggle games, so it certainly doesn't stand out at all. There's not much you can say to bring it down, it's pretty much the most minimalistic Game & Watch title. If this isn't, I don't know what is. Game Mode A has 2 balls while Game Mode B has 3. I've never understood why in Game B you score 10 points at a time instead of 1. It's pretty much the only Game & Watch game to do this, and I don't know why it did. This is easily the most re-released Game & Watch game since they put it in all sorts of random stuff, like the Game Boy camera. and they would reissue it in 2010 for Club Nintendo members. It's also going to appear twice more on this list, so just a warning. Well, don't say I didn't warn you, since now we have Mario the Juggler. This was actually the last Game & Watch game released until the 2010s, and they decided to remake the one that started it all. And yeah, in Game A it plays identically, but the reason this is a separate entry is Game B. They added a Hammer Bro and Lakitu that try to mess up your juggling sometimes. Yeah, that's it. Like I said, if there's gameplay differences, I'll consider something a unique entry. But the real reason it's higher than Ball is because, I do like Mario. Flagman is no doubt one of the most unique playing Game & Watch titles, since it doesn't go for the arcade high score chasing style, but is instead a game all about memorization. This is actually the second game to be released after Ball, which is pretty interesting seeing how different it is from anything else released for Game & Watch. And after this, they would go back to the Ball style score chasing. Not that there's no scoring in this game, but the way it's displayed is pretty strange since it looks like the time. Each point you get means one more thing you'll have to memorize, with the absolute max number being 99. I'd actually like to see someone make it to 99 since I don't think anyone's memory is that perfect. If it is, you are not human, alright? Might get that checked out even. Game B is not memory based, but is more about reaction. It gives you a timer and you just have to press the button that matches the number displayed, which for some reason really confuses me since the order the numbers displayed does not match the button locations, which always messes me up eventually. Fire Silver version, also known as Fireman depending on the region, is the fourth Game & Watch game ever created, and it is quite primitive. You only get a point for every individual you successfully bounce into the ambulance, which makes this a really slow game when it comes to scoring. Once you have 3 to 5 people on screen at a time to bounce to safety, it gets fairly engaging. It just takes a while to get to that point. It starts out with only 1 or 2, so it's a pretty slow start. Ideally, I don't want to have to wait that long for things to get engaging. But hold on to your horses, Fire fans, as this will not be the last we see of it on this list. Also, how many people are even in this building? What the heck? Also, is anyone even trying to put that fire out? Snoopy Tennis, that's right, a Peanuts game by Nintendo. I'd actually love to see them make another Snoopy game. I'm quite a fan of this dog. I even own this cool mug of his. As far as I know, the last time Nintendo worked on a Snoopy title was Snoopy Concert for the Super Famicom. These days, though, another Peanuts game by Nintendo would never happen. Weirdly enough, this would not be the only Snoopy Tennis game either. Infogrames published one for the Game Boy Color, and despite being released 20 years later, just like the Game & Watch game, it has no music. What the heck? First thing you may notice about this one is that the device is pink. Now, wouldn't it be cool if Nintendo released a new pink Game & Watch handheld? Or is that not allowed because it's HAL Labs? Whatever, a man can dream. You may have also noticed that I haven't talked about the game yet, and well, there's not all that much to say. This game has a really slow start, unfortunately, even on Game B, and really takes a while to get going. The scoring in this one is fairly unique since hitting the ball back gives you 2 points instead of the usual 1, while hitting the one Lucy sends back rewards you with 3 points. I really just wish this game didn't have such a slow start. Spitball Sparky. Strange name, but what a funny little guy. This is the other game in the Super Color series and is a breakout style game. It's got similar problems to Pinball since having complex physics with these devices is pretty much impossible. And as a result, this game is quite easy. The ball is not only predictable, but also slow. But clearly I still enjoy this game quite a lot more than Pinball, seeing as it's much higher up on the list. I'm not really into breakout style games, and Nintendo themselves have created far better handheld games in the genre than this one. Even if you are a fan of these types of games, I don't think this is going to appeal to you much due to the reasons I already mentioned, but also the appeal of these games is often the intense difficulty. Spitball Sparky is pretty hard to lose in, but can't say they didn't try despite the limitations, and there's actually a decent amount of variety in this game compared to most on this list. As far as Game & Watch games, this is also one of the most unique. What's not so unique is Snoopy. That's right, we got 2 Snoopies in the Game & Watch series, and I like this one slightly more. Instead of tennis, gotta be honest, I don't care about tennis, we got Schroeder playing the piano. Basically, you gotta smash the music notes to prevent the woodstocks from being woken up. The sounds from Snoopy's jumps and hammering is usually much more deafening than any sounds coming from the piano. What's most impressive about this game are the visuals. While Snoopy Tennis did a good job recreating the art style, this looks straight out of the comics. This game is pretty similar to another game, Vermin, yet it's far slower, which is why I don't enjoy it nearly as much. This may also be another game where Mode B is easier than Mode A, at least for me. Next we got Helmet. That's right, this absolute classic. It's an earlier game, so it's certainly quite simplistic, but unlike most, it doesn't start out all that slow. You can start scoring immediately and it lets you move at your own pace. You just have to make it from one building to the other while avoiding all the tools dropping on you. When you make it to the building on the right, you immediately end up back in the building on the left, so honestly really have no idea what's going on here. Maybe you're just playing as a different worker or something. You do earn extra points for accomplishing this though. Just hope that the left door doesn't close on you. Despite this game being called Helmet, this quote-unquote helmet actually does absolutely nothing to help you, since if you get hit, you just die. Maybe because it's actually just a hat. This game is known as Headache in the United Kingdom though, and yeah, that makes a whole lot more sense. Despite this correction, no one seemed to care about it over there. As you get further in this game, there are more tools that drop faster and faster. It actually gets pretty crazy. It does feel like there's slightly more RNG involved in this one, with the door closing and the tool patterns you may get. It's also kind of hard to see the order of the tools falling. Also, this door can just really screw you up. Frickin' hate this guy. Just like boxing, Judge is basically a fighting game. Unlike boxing though, if you want to play with a second person, you have to both use the same handheld, which I imagine is quite awkward. This isn't a micro versus game, so you each don't get your own controller. Game mode A though is playing against a computer, which is the only way I've played this game. If anyone actually wants to play a 2-player Judge, please let me know. If you've played Quick Draw and Kirby, this is actually kind of similar, being a game all about reaction. Basically, if you have the higher number, you need to hit the attack button, and if you have the lower number, you need to press dodge, or nigeru as the game calls it. If you manage to hit someone, you will score 3 points, while a successful dodge rewards you with 2. The objective being to score 99 points. Yeah, this game does eventually get old, believe it or not. Reaching the score against a mere computer is not very satisfactory, I'm gonna be honest. Probably a bit more fun with the second person, but even then I'd imagine it gets pretty old before it even finishes. This game should probably just end a whole lot earlier. Now we have the first vertical multi-screen game to appear on this list. They only made 3 of these things, all releasing in 1983. It's also one of the only Game & Watches I actually own. It may be called Mario Bros, but it's not nearly as exciting as the arcade Mario Bros. But believe it or not, this actually came out first. This is actually Luigi's first ever appearance. Pretty big deal, guys. I mean, this is the first Mario Bros game, releasing only 11 days before Mario Bros Arcade. Instead of combat against Koopas and Sidesteppers, this seems to take place before Mario and Luigi became plumbers. Working at a bottling plant, kind of a strange premise for a game. You're just loading cases onto a conveyor belt and eventually tossing them onto a truck. Like many of these games, it can feel a bit too slow, but being able to control both plumbers at once is kind of neat. And you could easily make this into a 2-player game with a second person. Back when Nintendo made Popeye video games, all of them simply being called Popeye, except for Popeye's English fun that is, and as the title suggests, it's actually pretty fun. Just like Mickey Mouse and Snoopy, Popeye's first video game appearance would be on the Game & Watch, although it was originally supposed to be in Donkey Kong. I guess E.C. Seeger must have been a fan of Donkey Kong, allowing Nintendo to use his beloved character after playing it. Which brings us to this. And it's just another juggle game. That is, without the juggling. I don't know what's with taking these popular comic and animated characters and sticking them into strange premises on Game & Watch. I mean, I don't even know what's going on here. Olive Oil is throwing a bunch of food at Popeye in a tiny little boat while Brutus attempts to bash his brains out, I guess. Sadly, you can't fight him at all. Kind of the one thing I'd expect to do in a Popeye game. But hey, you never know. Could have happened later on this list, all I'm saying. Now here we have what is the first Game & Watch where you control 2 guys at once. Although I'd certainly rather play as the lions and maul these guys. Though when it comes to Game & Watches, you generally just play as some average working men instead of something actually cool like a lion. In Game A there's 2 lions, while in Game B there's 3. And you just try and do your best to not get mauled by these hungry fellas. Although it seems like most of the time they just try and fake you out. So they're actually not all that predictable, which helps to make things more engaging. There's a bit of quick reactions required. This also happens to be the last Game & Watch release in the Gold series, and was the worst selling of the 3, but despite that, it does manage to be the highest ranked one on this list. Pretty middle of the road Game & Watch overall though, nothing to really complain about, but also not all that interesting. Well, Mario and Luigi must have been fired from the bottling plant, since shortly after they'd end up in a cement factory. Well actually, apparently it's Mario's cement factory, like he's the boss, but it certainly doesn't seem that way when you play the game. Maybe no one else has the skills required to do this. I'd imagine this takes place before Donkey Kong, and this might actually be how you develop the skills needed to defeat the ape. While in Mario Bros the worst that can happen is getting yelled at by your boss and seemingly being fired, in this game the worst that can happen to you is death. That's right, you can either fall to your death back when this guy actually took fall damage, or you can get crushed. So yeah, a bit of a scarier job for these two brothers. Which yes, is mostly why it's above Mario Bros on this list. Well actually, I'm pretty sure you can only play as Mario in this one since, as you can tell, Luigi seems to have been incapacitated. Crazy enough, this is not the first Mario Cement Factory released in the Game & Watch series. There is another which we'll get to shortly. Despite being released after, I do believe that this is the inferior of the two. It's no doubt one of the slowest scoring of all these games, perhaps even the slowest. Mickey and Donald. This is the last time we'll see of this mouse on this list, but it seems like he's brought some friends with him this time. Donald and Goofy. This is another licensed game with such a weird premise. I really have a hard time believing that this game was originally designed with these characters in mind. Well, I suppose it's a whole lot less strange than Egg. If anyone knows a 1930s Mickey Mouse film involving eggs, please let me know. I gotta be honest guys, the first time I played this game I didn't know what the heck was happening, but still managed to score into the 500s, so it's certainly one of the easiest games on here. Which is partly because it's a fast scoring one, but there's also not too much to worry about. By controlling Mickey, you try to patch up a hose allowing water to flow, and as Donald you drop it onto the fire. So yeah, unlike in the game Fire, they're actually attempting to put it out here. Once you manage to put it out, Minnie will show up and reward you with 12 points. I actually don't think they care about saving lives at all. I think they just want Mickey to get some, since as soon as she leaves, they set the building back on fire. Pretty decent use of the vertical multi-screen here, and there's a bit of fun little multitasking here, playing as two different characters on two different screens. I would recommend Game B over A though, which is not wildly different or anything, just slightly harder, which this game certainly needs in my opinion. In this game, you play as a guy that is seemingly trying to prevent his pet fish from killing themselves, since they won't stop jumping out of their tanks. I guess it's because these fish are tropical or something, since I never had this problem when owning fish myself. This dude's pet cat is also looking to pounce, since if you let fish fall to the ground, he'll devour the fish and turn it into a skeleton, which is probably pretty accurate to real life. These cats in these Game & Watches tend to be rather wicked, but so are some of these Game & Watch fish, so we'll see that later. While this game has a slow start like most do, it gets quite hectic. I mean, you can be dealing with 5 fish at once if you get deep enough, which can end up feeling a little impossible, especially in Game B where they jump either left or right out of the fishbowl. This game is pretty solid for what it is, but also kind of forgettable due to the similarities with plenty of other games gameplay-wise. You can probably think of a few yourself. Wasn't gonna stop Sakurai from putting it in Smash somehow though. Alright, and now we have the second horizontal multi-screen title to appear on the list, Rain Shower. Maybe it's just me, but the screens being separated here I feel like makes the game much harder, since it's easier to miss a lone raindrop. Definitely one that's easier to play in the gallery, I feel. So instead of this madman just taking his clothes inside to dry, he'd rather try and avoid every single individual raindrop. And in Game B, crows come out to try and move your clothes. I don't know what problems these birds have with this guy, clearly they're just trolls. But honestly, if I was a crow, I'd probably spend my days trolling humans as well. I do like when Game A and B have noticeable gameplay differences though. A lot of times I can't really tell the difference between them. This game tends to be a bit slower, but as I've said, the main problem I have with it is just the gap between the screens, since for whatever reason I feel like it can make it harder to play, and harder to notice every single raindrop, but hey, maybe that's just me. I just personally prefer to play without the gap, but for this list I'm only going off the original hardware. And here we have, again, another one of the only devices I actually own. This thing actually became possessed once on Halloween night out of nowhere and kind of freaked me out. The game was just playing itself after not being used for like months. I don't even think the batteries were fully in. Look, I don't know, man. I'm not even joking. My footage of the tabletop just sucks, so I think I'll just show footage of the Panorama version, which clearly I do not have. Anyway, you might remember if you didn't skip the video, how I was talking about in the original Popeye widescreen, you could not fight Brutus at all, which I found to be rather disappointing. This game, on the other hand, is all about combat and even has spinach you can eat to become stronger. This game is really easy, you just pound on this guy and it doesn't really feel like there's much he can do back to you. If you play Game B, there will be a swordfish that appears on occasion that will try and poke you. This game is actually much better than boxing. It has faster speed, some extra gameplay variety with the swordfish and spinach. You can knock Brutus off into the water, which is pretty satisfying, and works better as a high score chasing game rather than boxing, where whoever reaches 0 first loses. This would have been a rather cool 2-player game, but it's not, so you have no choice but to beat this stupid computer repeatedly until you get bored, which won't take very long. I think it's got just about all the things you'd want in a Popeye game, and I'm more than happy to own it. And here we have Donkey Kong. Despite being a Game & Watch game, it's actually much better than many console versions of Donkey Kong released at the same time, like the dreadful Donkey Kong for Atari 2600. But but this is also probably the most important Game & Watch ever released. Now why is that? Well, this is the first ever use of the D-pad created by Gunpei Yokoi, which of course Nintendo would use for their Famicom controller, and well, just about every controller after this, Nintendo or not, would have some form of D-pad as well. And yeah, the placement of the D-pad closely resembles the DS, but especially 3DS and 2DS since it's placed a bit lower on those. Although this is not the first vertical multi-screen game, as the first one was Oil Panic, so we gotta give Oil Panic credit for basically creating the DS design. But how crazy is it that Nintendo can look back to the early 80s and reuse their old designs for modern systems, since they nailed it way back then? I mean, the foldable 2 screens is just perfection for a handheld system. I just feel like other companies can't really look back that far. Or maybe they can. What the hell even is this thing? But anyway, about time I actually talk about the gameplay here. This game is basically just the first level of the original Donkey Kong game without the hammer, which doesn't really matter. I mean, you look at the Atari 2600 version of Donkey Kong and the hammer is basically useless in that game. And here we're working with even simpler technology, but it's basically the first level made quite a bit harder since at times you can't always jump over the barrels, and later on in the game iron bars will appear above your head as you get further in the game, making it even harder. And instead of just climbing up a ladder, you gotta pull a lever and time a jump at a crane, which can be quite tricky to time, especially with DK dropping barrels directly above you. I gotta be honest, I much prefer the Game & Watch Galleries versions of this game, as they feature multiple levels so it doesn't get quite as repetitive as quickly. And I mean, there are far better ways to play Donkey Kong in particular in a handheld format in 2024 with the Switch, and well, I mean, if you really want to consider the Game Boy Donkey Kong, even though it's a lot different of a game, it is still called just Donkey Kong. Basically, what I'm trying to say is there's no reason for me to return to this particular version of Donkey Kong, which is why it's in the spot it is on this list. You know, a lot of these games only exist on Game & Watch and nowhere else, so there's not some better version I could be playing. I mean, where else am I going to play Squish? Oh, we didn't talk about that one yet. Alright. Mario's Bombs Away. That's right, an all-out war game featuring Mario where he tries to deliver bombs at Nam, while enemy soldiers try to set the bomb off. Now, how many people even knew this guy is a war veteran? This is perhaps Mario's deadliest job ever, and besides having to deal with all these enemy soldiers behind you, you have to deal with Heavy Smoker. Yeah, these days we would never get a Mario game with smoking tobacco in it. How inappropriate. But anyway, this guy Heavy Smoker is one of your comrades, but he's not paying attention to the war. Instead, he will toss his burning cigars into a stream of oil that will set the bomb off and kill Mario if you're not careful. So I mean, this could actually be interpreted as anti-smoking, and maybe it's not actually inappropriate. So you have to choose to hold the bomb upwards or downwards depending on the situation. Besides getting 5 points from successfully delivering a bomb to your troops, you can also get 10 points from planting bombs on all 5 trees, erasing the enemy troop. You also get 1 point for every step you move, so yeah, I certainly like that there's multiple ways to earn points in this one. It just so happens that I like 21 Game & Watches more. Donkey Kong Jr. Actually, there's quite a few Donkey Kong Jr.'s in the Game & Watch series of handhelds, but this is the tabletop or Panorama version. Honestly, the graphics of this game look pretty strange compared to most. I mean, these characters are unrecognizable, which is kind of strange, seeing how they nailed the look of Snoopy and Popeye, also in the tabletop or Panorama series. Maybe it's because these character designs weren't as established back then. The apes in this game really just look like generic cartoon monkeys and not members of the DK family. Mario doesn't exactly look like his usual self either. Actually, he just sits there and does absolutely nothing. Doesn't even move an inch, unlike in the original game where he's releasing snap jaws at the baby monkey. Anyway, of all the Donkey Kong Jr. games, this one is my least favorite, mostly because it's a slower paced game that mostly just requires patience, since you gotta wait till the perfect time to line up with the umbrellas and balloons, which, by the way, where are these things even coming from and why? I don't know, man. If you can't tell, I'm a little weirded out by everything in this game, right down to the graphics, and even the music stolen from Johann Sebastian Bach. Anyway, at the beginning you gotta grab a key, and once you make it to DK, you need to line up with the lock that DK is holding while dodging a whole lot of birds. I mean, these guys can be a bit of a problem. Actually, they're really annoying. That's why Mario can just sit there and let the birds do all the work for him. Once you free DK using 4 keys, you'll earn an extra 10 points. So yeah, while it narrowly missed the Game & Watch top 20, it is also simply the worst Donkey Kong Jr. in the series. Maybe I'll get to cover some superior ones shortly. We're back with more Mario's Cement Factory, this time the tabletop version. And like I said earlier, despite this one releasing first, it's actually the better of the two versions. Not only looking better with some nice colors, but it also plays better as well, being a faster scoring game, which yeah, the game speed in these games is pretty dang important. There's also a pole at the top you can grab onto to avoid certain death from being crushed. In this version, the concrete quickly comes out of a chute instead of slowly being released from a container on a conveyor belt. The new widescreen version just starts out too dang boring where there's just not a lot happening. The only reason Mario Cement Factory was re-released in that series is because, well, the tabletop series flopped, all selling less than 250,000. While Mario Cement Factory new widescreen version sold more than 1 million, so more than the entire tabletop series combined. Probably because the tabletop series missed the whole appeal of Game & Watch being its portability. Imagine getting caught playing one of the tabletops on a train. You'd probably get made fun of. So while I completely understand why the game was recreated as a new widescreen, I don't understand why that one is worse in every way. I mean, I haven't even mentioned that it's missing the soundtrack of the tabletop version. This is the last time we'll see a tabletop on this list, as well as the last time we see Mario working these random ass jobs, as from now on, we'll only be seeing appearances from Jumpman and Super Mario himself. Zelda, that's right, a Zelda game makes an appearance. For the most part, the only Nintendo IPs that are used in the Game & Watch series are Donkey Kong and Mario, and well, I guess Balloon Fight and Punch-Out, but here we have Zelda, which is actually still relevant in the year 2024. And it is the last vertical multi-screen released in the series, meaning this design would go unused until the DS. And I want to apologize for the awful footage you're seeing, you probably can't even see anything, but I really didn't want to recapture this game in an emulator because, well, this is actually the longest Game & Watch game by far. It took me over 50 minutes to finish. It's like the only Game & Watch game with an actual ending. You have to go through dungeons to gather 8 Triforce pieces by defeating 8 dragons, which is always on the top screen as you're going from floor to floor. Yeah, just random dragons. Ganon is not even in this game. And then you save Zelda. But yeah, I really didn't want to replay this for better footage since it's just not that fun. You just kill a bunch of fodder enemies on the bottom screen until some stairs show for you to attack the dragon, and there's unlimited continue so you don't really have to play very well at all. You'll beat the game eventually in time. It's mostly really repetitive, but there are interesting aspects about the game. You know, besides Zelda 2, this is the only Nintendo developed Zelda that uses this perspective. I would have used Zelda 2 music over this, but this guy is evil, so I had to go with some CDI music. It also doesn't play like anything else on Game & Watch as it's not a high score chasing game, but is instead more like an actual console adventure game, like Zelda. There's even an inventory and also a second quest once you beat the game. I must admit I have zero interest in playing the second quest. I don't even like the second quest in the original Zelda very much. But yeah, I'm pretty happy to own this device since it is rather cool. Although I would like to see Nintendo make another 2D Zelda game in this perspective, or maybe someone like Mercury Steam could pull it off. But sadly at the moment this is the last one in this style, although it doesn't really play very similar to Zelda 2. I guess I just gotta stop complaining and finally check out the CDI games. They got some pretty good music. Everyone knows Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong 3, but if you ever wondered, where is Donkey Kong 2? Well, it was actually a Game & Watch the whole time. Crazy, I know. Don't let the title fool you though, this game is actually just Donkey Kong Jr. again. And I like this quite a bit more than the previous. It makes pretty decent use of the vertical multi-screen acting as 2 parts of the level, making this the largest stage of the DK Jr. Game & Watches. It's kind of the same deal where the goal is to grab 4 keys to free DK, which rewards you with 20 points. Though every time you get a key you have to backtrack to the other screen, which I'm not sure I'm a huge fan of. You can probably tell this is a lot more accurate to the arcade game compared to the tabletop DK Jr. and yeah, I definitely prefer how this one plays, but again, for me it's only the second best game of the DK Jr. trilogy in the Game & Watch series. There's still one more. But actually it's kind of weird that there's 3 DK Juniors and only 1 Donkey Kong, since I always figured everyone likes Donkey Kong more. Actually, Donkey Kong is by far the best-selling Game & Watch at 8 million, meaning it sold way better than all DK Juniors combined. And all other Game & Watches sold far less than it. I mean, Game & Watch Donkey Kong sold more than the Atari Lynx, WonderSwan, and Neo Geo Pocket combined. But instead of making an actual sequel to that game, you know, maybe just another handheld that's the same gameplay, just a different level, they instead tried to trick everyone with yet another DK Jr. Strange. Lifeboat, the last and highest ranking of the 3 horizontal multi-screens, and it's not at all surprising they would stop making these. I mean, it kind of feels like a really limited design compared to the vertical multi-screens. And I've already complained about the gap between the screens. It really feels like you can accomplish these same games on one screen anyway. And if you're given the choice on an emulator or in one of the Game & Watch galleries, it definitely is just better to play. But being able to fold it for portability to fit it comfortably in your pocket is pretty nice. This is actually a very similar game to another Game & Watch that we haven't gotten to yet. It came out 2 years earlier than this. As for Lifeboat, I have zero doubt that Sam Quint would have gotten major PTSD from playing this game. This is basically the most violent Game & Watch we've seen yet on this list, and I'm all for it. For whatever reason, sharks seem to be the only creature allowed to actually eat people on Game & Watches, as we did not see that with Lion. although I'd much rather encounter a shark than a lion in real life, and I think most people that have spent time pondering about this are on the same page as me. In this game, you're just trying to capture falling passengers from a burning ship so they aren't devoured, with Game Mode A having 2 lifeboats and Game Mode B having only 1, meaning you have to move it from one screen to the other. You do have to drop off these passengers as you go along because the boat can only hold so many. Pretty simple game, but for me it is only the second best Game & Watch that features funny little people getting eaten by sharks. We're back with Donkey Kong Jr. yet again, this time the new widescreen version. This is not only the best of the 3 in my opinion, despite being a single screen game, but is also the last of the Donkey Kong series we'll be seeing on this list, so I'm sorry if that disappoints my fellow Donkey Kongers. I just like how this one plays the most. Once again, you must collect the 4 keys to free DK, and the key is kind of like the crane in the original Donkey Kong Game & Watch, where you have to time your jump to grab onto it or else you die. The faster you accomplish this, the more points you score for freeing DK, so I like that the game is designed to be fast-paced or at least rewards you for playing it fast. Unlike Donkey Kong and the other Donkey Kong Juniors on Game & Watch, this does not have a D-pad but instead has directional buttons, kind of like the Joy-Con, which I admittedly hate. Although the directional buttons don't really hurt the playability of a Game & Watch title, but using these on something like Mega Man Legacy Collection on Switch, you may as well not even play. I have no idea if they got the idea for the directional buttons on the Joy-Con from these Game & Watches. They may very well have, but you really shouldn't have done that, Nintendo, but you probably just want everyone to buy your $70 Pro controller.
Oil Panic.
Like I was saying earlier, we can give credit to Donkey Kong for being the originator of the D-pad, but Oil Panic was the first vertical multi-screen release, so we can thank it for creating the design of the DS and 3DS that would be used over 2 to 3 decades later. Honestly, I do think any game can benefit from having 2 screens, so it's a shame Nintendo would completely abandon it after the Wii U and 3DS, but that's mostly the gamers' faults. Oil Panic itself does benefit from it due to the multitasking element of paying attention to 2 screens at once. You gotta fill your bucket with the drops of oil from a leak in the top screen, but you can't store more than 3 drops, so you have to be sure to dump it to the guy below before the next drop drops. You also have to be sure you don't drop your oil on the oblivious customers. Sometimes it can feel like you just get unlucky with the pattern in this game, as you might not be able to move to catch drops due to being stuck in the dumping animation, or the guy below just won't cooperate the way you want him to. But this was a pretty decent start to the vertical multi-screen series. I just feel like there are more interesting games that utilize the 2 screens released later down the line, which we will see soon, hopefully. I can't believe this video is this long and we've made it to the top 15. Now here's an absolute classic, Chef, which could be argued to be the best juggle Game & Watch. This one grew on me over time since I was initially really pissed off by this cat that tries to mess up your juggling. I mean, what's this guy's problem? He just catches the meat with a fork and doesn't even want to eat it. But eventually I got used to him. There's 3 meats you have to juggle on Game A and 4 on Game B, and the game gets to be pretty engaging as it gets faster, requiring split-second reactions as you try and determine the order you should juggle the meats. There's a funny mouse that'll come in and eat any meat you drop, so not only did they let a cat into the kitchen for some reason, they have a mouse problem as well. And the mouse also knows how to use utensils. But I don't know, maybe the chef is just serving these meats to these animals since there doesn't seem to be any customers. Or he just wants to juggle these meats until the end of time, for some strange reason. Like Mario's Bombs Away, Fire Attack is an all-out war game, although much more intense honestly. You play as a cowboy and defend a fort from the natives of the Game & Watch universe. I mean, you play as a guy fending off an entire army with nothing more than a hammer. One small problem with the game though. Notably, it is one of the most notoriously racist games of all time. So racist, in fact, the dude from Fire Attack has been forever banned from participating in Super Smash Bros. Although if you have an unpatched version of Ultimate, you can still witness him. As for the Game & Watch itself, honestly this device has probably my favorite colors of all of them. I wish they were all this appealing to look at. Being this high on the list, you can probably guess I enjoyed playing this one more than most. And honestly, it's probably a better cowboy game than the likes of Red Dead Redemption, and even the almighty Custer's Revenge. Stanley the Bugman is back in Greenhouse. That's right, the dude from Donkey Kong 3. Actually, this game came out before Donkey Kong 3, so this is his first appearance as this device came out in 1982, while Donkey Kong 3 was in 83. Instead of dealing with an ape though, you have to deal with non-stop hordes of insects coming into your greenhouse, so you have to constantly go from the top and bottom screens to spray them, preventing them from touching your beloved flowers that are actually alive, with faces, and terrified. I'd be pretty scared of these worms too. It's pretty easy to score highly in this game even on Game B, but since you're always moving all over the place in this game to stop all the insects, it's one of the more exciting games as you never have to stop and wait for anything to happen, which is unfortunately a flaw of many Game & Watches. So Greenhouse is definitely one of the best uses of the vertical multi-screen, as it requires you to pay attention to both screens more than any other due to the hectic nature of the game. Well, what I tell you, Fire fans, you can put down your torches now, as we're back with Fire once again, this time the widescreen version. Not only are the graphics a whole lot better here, but the game gets going a lot quicker. Instead of only scoring when you successfully get a jumper into the ambulance, you score every time you bounce a jumper. In this version, there can be as many as 8 jumpers on screen at a time, making it a whole lot more exciting than the original game, which is just far too slow. I'm glad they came out with this version since they fixed that game's biggest problems, and there's no reason I'd ever want to return to Silver, which is why it's much lower on the list. You do have to appreciate both versions for having death in them though, as once these guys hit the ground they turn into angels, whereas the gallery version replaces misses with bandages. How lame. A reminder that video games are just getting worse all the time. Once again, no one even attempts to put out the fire, but considering Donald, Mickey, and Goofy are the only firefighters of the Game & Watch universe, and they set buildings on fire themselves to impress Minnie, it's probably wise to not call these guys over after all. Speaking of Game & Watches with death in them, we finally made it to Parachute. I've alluded to this game more than once already, but we finally have the #1 Game & Watch game that involves people getting eaten by sharks. This is a very simple game, but as part of the appeal to me, you catch these parachuters that are jumping out of a helicopter into a boat above shark-infested waters. How do you even put yourself in this situation? Once they land on the boat, they just disappear, unlike in Lifeboat, where they take up space and you have to bring some to shore. Where do these guys even go? Did they get eaten by the boat? Kind of crazy how happy-go-lucky the music that you hear in the background is. It's from the modern version of the game in the gallery. A lot of these Game & Watches can actually be pretty dark, so I don't really like that the music from the gallery games don't reflect that at all, even though I've been using them for the entire video. In Game B, one of these idiots gets caught in a tree occasionally, so there's a clear difference between both modes, which I see as a positive. Of course, if you fail to catch one of these guys, you get to watch them get eaten by a shark, which I don't really view as much of a punishment at all. For being the very first game in the widescreen series, I'd say they did a pretty good job with this one. The very next game released in the widescreen series after Parachute is Octopus, and they actually combined the two in Game & Watch Collection 2 on the DS, which is kind of a neat idea. But I swear it's just a coincidence that they're right next to each other on this list. This game was actually voted as the best Game & Watch by Japanese gamers with 404 votes. Second place was actually Parachute with 158 votes, so I guess these two games were destined to be closely linked with each other or something. I do love the tropical setting of both games. Since I live in Maine, we could use some warmth here every now and then. The Japanese gamers picking this as the best Game & Watch was actually a pretty good choice. It was actually my favorite for years until I played all the games above it on this list. You play as 3 divers and you try and steal gold from a chest of a sunken ship that's being guarded by a large octopus. This guy looks pretty funny, but he's rather dangerous as he'll strangle you to death. So one of the 2 marine animals that can kill you on a Game & Watch device. You can score in 2 ways in this game. You can just keep collecting from the chest for 1 point at a time, or you can retreat back to your boat for 3 points. This is kind of a slower paced game, requiring more patience than most, as you judge the movement of the octopus's tentacles before you make a decision on what to do. But despite the slower pace, I still enjoy it a lot more than most. The concept is very unique. You will probably do poorly in this game the first time playing compared to most, but once you figure out the pattern of the tentacles, you'll do a lot better. Although you'll probably still get trapped when you don't expect it, since the pattern at times can be brutal. Here we have Gold Cliff. Now whoever designed this game must have seen the disappearing blocks in Mega Man and thought, we should really turn that into an entire game. That is, a Game & Watch game. No, really, I'm pretty sure that's exactly what happened. Since Mega Man 1 was a bit of a flop, they probably thought no one would notice. If you're not a fan of those sections in Mega Man, you may want to stay away from this one. You play as basically Indiana Jones and try to jump your way up to a key every level to gain access to the temple. This game actually features infinite continues just like Zelda, so you can just keep playing this forever if you want, but I'm not sure why you would. There's not really a true ending to this one, and your score goes down to 0 if you die. Just like Zelda, there's also a boss fight in this game. This one happens every 4 stages, so due to these similarities, I'm pretty sure this was designed by the same guy. Unfortunately though, I have no idea where you find information on who designed specific Game & Watches. It may just not exist. I would say the best thing about this game is the variety, since after defeating the boss, you think it just loops, but as far as I can tell, the levels continue to have differences from one another. So you could probably play this for hours and still see entirely new levels. Not that it doesn't get repetitive though. I pretty much just choose to stop playing after I cut the boss with a sword. Also, I almost forgot to mention this was the last Game & Watch to be released before the Game Boy came out. Super Mario Bros. Yes, you heard that correctly. The best thing I can say about this game is that it's actually better than the more recent handheld Super Mario game, Super Mario Run, which I just replayed to confirm this. Being better than that game is not very impressive though, but you have to remember the technology here is very limited. I do wonder why this gets left out when discussing the mainline Mario games, but Mario Run gets included. Despite the name, this is not a port of Super Mario Bros. NES, if that wasn't obvious. This whole game is actually an auto-scroller, which makes this the first time an auto-scroll level appears in the Super Mario Bros. Series, as this predates Mario 3 by over 2 years. Unfortunately though, I don't view this as a positive since I'm a bit of an auto-scroll level hater, but it is still an interesting little fact. There's 2 versions of this game, the original crystal screen and new widescreen versions, with the only change in this one being that Mario now actually resembles Mario. Actually, there's also a 3rd version in the shape of Discoon, which looks pretty dang cool. Once you beat World 1, you've pretty much beaten the game since the levels just loop afterward, only with slightly more added challenges with bullet bills and Lakitus. The length of this game is actually a little impressive since it takes me longer to defeat Bowser in this game than if I play some of the console Mario's warpless, but again, no matter how much you want to master the game, you'll pretty much always be going through at the same pace, which I think is my single biggest problem with the game. I like to be able to plow through my Marios once I reach a certain level, as I'm sure most do, and that's just not possible with this one. But this is still a pretty admirable effort by Nintendo at recreating the Super Mario experience on a Game & Watch. Vermin, also known as the Exterminator in North America, which is a much cooler name, is the 3rd Game & Watch ever released, so given how old it is, I think it's quite impressive that it ended up this high up on the list. Basically, it's kind of like whack-a-mole, and this is not the last time Nintendo would promote animal abuse through bludgeoning mammals with a large hammer in their games. Pretty messed up that they would do that. Yeah, this game is very simple, but here's the thing, you don't have to wait very long for the action like you do in most. It doesn't take long until you really can't afford to take your eyes off the screen. This one you'll end up scoring into the triple digits in less than 2 minutes. Hundreds of moles massacred in just minutes. Honestly, Migo were very justified in changing the name from Vermin to the Exterminator, although this would not save themselves from being exterminated shortly after. But yeah, this game just has a nice flow to it, which makes it very satisfying to play. Bomb Sweeper. Despite being a dual screen game, the game itself really only takes place on the bottom screen, while the top screen just displays the time and basically cutscenes. You play as John Solver and you gotta solve these mazes by pushing these walls to defuse a bomb planted by none other than Jack Dynamite. If you goof and push the wrong walls on your way to the bombs, you have no choice but to wait for the timer to count down for your demise, which I think is my least favorite thing about the game. Although it's not too big of a deal since the timer does go by pretty fast, I'm just not a fan of waiting. In Game A you have 50 seconds to defuse bombs and 10 mazes before you reach the scrolling level, while in Game B you have 40 seconds and 15 mazes. Despite this difference in time, I had an easier time with Game B since after you finish the 10 mazes in Game A, you have to do the scrolling level, and I already told you how I feel about these. This kinda just slows down the game. Once you beat this level, you'll shake hands with the mayor in the top screen, which is basically all it's used for. Yeah, not the best usage of the dual screens here, but this game is still quite enjoyable due to the seemingly randomly generated mazes, adding for good variety, and the quick thinking required. You can definitely play this one without getting bored a lot longer than most. It would have been cool to see this concept taken further with more powerful technology, but Nintendo probably forgot it exists by now since it didn't really sell all too well. If you haven't played Squish by now, have you ever truly lived? The top screen has this guy Grumpy who is trying to squish the player, who plays as Ziggy the Maze Man. Yeah, we're getting into some pretty obscure Nintendo characters here. As for what these guys are even supposed to be, I don't know, they kind of remind me of the viruses from Dr. Mario, but I guess these are more like computer viruses, so it's kind of interesting that they look the same. But basically Grumpy changes the directions the walls move in depending on where he's pointing, and yeah, I'm fairly certain that Miyamoto got the idea for Devil World from this game. The devil basically does the same exact thing as Grumpy here, although Devil World was far too offensive to actually release in North America. Before you get yourself squished in this game, you have to zap the bugs in 4 different corners. Just like Bomb Sweeper, the other maze game I just covered, I like the amount of variety and quick thinking due to all the possible scenarios that keep the game feeling fresh, which is pretty hard for a Game & Watch to do. And this is just really a faster paced game as you try to rush to the bugs before getting squished. Game B even more so, since there's a timer so you really can't afford to take your sweet time. Really just one of the most unique playing Game & Watches. I feel like a lot of these games can blend together, but Squish, one of a kind. At number 3 we have Climber. That's right, Ice Climber, but without the ice. And they could have easily made this an Ice Climber game since it does actually play quite similarly, but Nintendo for whatever reason refuses to make a second Ice Climber game, probably because everyone just considered it a warm-up before Super Mario Bros. So this game is basically the closest thing we get to a sequel. Climber is actually better than Ice Climber in some ways, particularly the jumping, which doesn't suck nearly as much. Unfortunately, you don't get hammers to whack things though, so all you can do is climb, by jumping that is, and breaking bricks. But it's still impressive an LCD game could come close to Ice Climber, and spoiler alert, this is actually the last LCD game on the list, which means I think it's the best LCD Game & Watch, so basically the best actual Game & Watch. I really just like the flow to this game, and you can go through it at your own pace, unlike Super Mario Bros., which is an auto-scroller, or Gold Cliff where you're always waiting for the platforms to appear. Although you'll still often have to wait for either a moving platform or a bridge to be made by the blockmen. Just like Gold Cliff, there's also basically a final boss in this game, Dragalo, who you can kill with a sword. He looks like a combination of a rat and a dragon and appears every 5 levels, although killing him is actually optional. Just like Ice Climber, you gotta grab onto a flying dude once you reach the top of a level, which according to the US packaging there are 99 levels in this game, compared to 32 mountains in Ice Climber. Although all these levels end up feeling the exact same from one another, and I really doubt anyone has actually finished all the supposed 99 levels, not even the person who made this claim. I should mention there's both the crystal screen and new widescreen version for this game, but both versions feature the exact same gameplay with no differences. After Mario the Juggler in 1991, there wouldn't be any new Game & Watches released until almost 30 years later in 2020 with Super Mario Bros. Once again, this time the color screen version. This was for the 35th anniversary of Mario, which I think most people were pretty disappointed with overall, but the Game & Watch Super Mario Bros. Was definitely one of the coolest things to come out of this anniversary. This little device contains the original Super Mario Bros., pretty much the most important game ever made, along with Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels, which is potentially my personal favorite 8-bit Mario, which I'm sure sounds crazy to many, but I've played through it far too many times at this point and it really grew on me. These games were also in Super Mario Bros. Deluxe for the Game Boy Color, and I will say, this Game & Watch is a far better way to play these games in a handheld format, since the Game Boy Color versions are quite compromised. But I do still have issues with this handheld. I'm really not a fan of these squishy rubber buttons when it comes to playing these games. I don't like how they feel, and maybe it's just me, but it makes it harder to be as precise in these games. I wish they just used plastic buttons instead. But yeah, I know that's not allowed on Game & Watch. This D-pad is also really small, which makes it a bit harder to play, as well as the input lag because, well, believe it or not, this is emulation. And the screen being only 2 inches makes it a bit more challenging as well. But it's this high up because this is Super Mario Bros. We're talking about. The caveman technology LCD games can't really compete. Now you might be wondering, is it cheating to simply plop some ROMs of some of the best games of all time onto a full-color pixel screen handheld? Is that fair to the other handhelds on this list? No. Yes, it is cheating, and it's not at all fair to the other handhelds on this list, which is why you can feel free to view Climber as the true number 1 on this list. My big question about this handheld is, however, could we really not get the Super Mario Land games or even just the other NES Mario games on this thing? I mean, was there really any reason to not include these, or did they just really want people to pay for the Switch Online or something? Whatever, it's hard to complain since these things are pretty cheap. I probably acquired mine at the time for like $25, far less than what the older Game & Watches go for. Oh wait, I did forget to mention this thing does include Ball, except now the guy has Mario's head, so basically Mario the Juggler again. Well, I guess I really can't complain now. Just kidding, what if they included the original Super Mario Bros. Game & Watch instead of Ball? That'd be pretty cool. A year later, Nintendo would release another Game & Watch, this time for Zelda's 35th anniversary, which admittedly was a lot worse than Mario's 35th anniversary. But we did still end up getting the best Game & Watch of all time. This bad boy is loaded with Vermin, which itself is one of the best Game & Watch games, being 6 on this list. Except now this guy's head has been replaced with Link's. If this was released back in the day like Mario the Juggler was, it would have probably been called something like Link the Exterminator. It also has Zelda 1, another one of the most important games of all time. Zelda 2, which is potentially my favorite Zelda game, and I would love to be using the music from this game in the background right now, but like I said previously, this guy is evil, so I can't. It also has Link's Awakening, easily a top 5 Game Boy game. These 3 games are absolutely fantastic, but I do wonder, why is A Link to the Past always missing from these collections? I find that kind of weird. You could say it's because they only wanted to include the 8-bit Zelda games, but in that case, where are the Oracle games? And yes, like the previous entry, these are just ROMs running on an emulator with a 2-inch screen. However, this Game & Watch succeeds better than any other when it comes to its pickup and play quality, which is arguably the most important aspect of a Game & Watch. Zelda 1 and 2 on NES requires you to die to save, or using a second controller and pressing up and start, but if you don't have a second controller, tough luck. This Game & Watch, however, you can shut it off or switch games and it'll always remember where you last left off. This combined with the impressive battery life and this thing being so small it'll fit anywhere makes it seamless to pick up and play at any time. Yes, this also has the squishy rubber buttons and small D-pad, which I'm not a fan of. but Zelda doesn't require nearly as much precision as Mario, so it didn't bother me nearly as much for this handheld. This was such an easy choice as number 1 since it's the Game & Watch I've dumped the most hours into, by a whole lot. Well, those are all the Game & Watches to date. I have no idea if Nintendo will ever feel like releasing another. A Metroid or Kirby one would be pretty cool, but that'll probably never happen since historically these franchises never appeared in Game & Watches, unlike Mario and Zelda. Maybe that means we could get a Punch-Out Game & Watch though. Just kidding, Punch-Out is like 10 times harder with input lag, so that would suck. But maybe Donkey Kong could work. If you're familiar with Game & Watches, let me know how wrong you think my ranking is in the comments. If you're unfamiliar with Game & Watches, I hope you were able to learn at least a few new things from this video. The Game & Watch legacy is a lot greater than just a playable character in Super Smash Bros, and I think this fact is often forgotten. A lot of important things that would change the gaming world for the rest of time originated on Game & Watch. The clamshell design of the DS and 3DS, the creation of the D-pad, Luigi's first appearance in a game, Donkey Kong's first playable appearance in a game, the first auto-scroll levels in a Super Mario game, the first ever Disney game if you care about that, and Stanley the Bugman. Okay, maybe not that one.